In T-minus 3, 2, 1, we begin the fun. Touring our way through the NBA from that big apple to the place by the bay. Is your mind buckled in? Because it's time to begin. Sekou and his friends are doing it again. The Hang Time Podcast is the spot, so sit back, relax, because the show's about to drop.
Welcome into another edition of the Hang Time Podcast. I'm your host, Sekou Smith, here in Atlanta. As always, digging in to the stories and the voices from the basketball world, both past, present, and future, hopefully. Just trying to get our heads around what's going on right now with this stoppage, the coronavirus global pandemic, slowing everything down. But it doesn't interrupt the conversations we're having with the folks in the basketball world. And joining us today on the podcast is Dave Cowens, Hall of Famer, a champion, Boston Celtics great, and a founder of the Retired Players Association for the NBA. And we've talked to some other folks, Johnny Davis most recently, from the Retired Players Association. But Dave, we want to definitely get you in here. We had a conversation at All-Star Weekend that unfortunately didn't see the light of day before the suspension of play happened. So I appreciate you taking some more of your time. And curious first and foremost about how you're doing and how you're handling this global shutdown with the coronavirus.
Well, thanks for asking. I hope you're doing well. I think everybody seems to be trying to stay out of harm's way and using common sense based on what we know up to date, but I think people got to get out and do things, and as long as they are doing the right things for themselves and their families. The only problem is, when you got kids and grandkids, and you go to the store, they go, well, I don't know, we might have to quarantine you for another 14 days. I'm going, come on. I got to be able to hug my grandbabies, So, but we seem to be doing. I'm in Maine, and so it's not a densely populated area, so there's plenty of room to walk around and breathe fresh air and all that. So we're kind of in a little bubble up here, and we're trying to stay in it.
Got you. So I mean, I'm interested. You're in Maine now, you say, and I know you played, basically most of all your career except for the time you spent with the Bucks, I guess, in Boston. You're a guy from Kentucky. How does one transition from Newport, Kentucky to Maine? What kind of transition is that?
A lot of hillbillies up here too,
Is it just
we're everywhere?
But is it just a matter of you when you play that long in Boston, you become a New Englander maybe, and find that Maine suits you, I guess, in terms of just that lifestyle like you mentioned, being in that bubble and being able to kind of live relaxed in the way you do now?
Well, I just look at it, I spent my first 17 years of life in Kentucky, and then I went to Florida State, and 9 months of that year I was in Florida, 3 months in Kentucky. Then I came to Boston, and since 1970, which is almost 50 years, I've been, pretty much up in New England. So comparatively speaking, I've met, besides for lifelong friends that I made, that I had as a kid, and relatives, and that kind of feeling you have about home. New England is really my home.
So what led you from Newport to Florida State? That would seem like a pretty bold move even then to go from Kentucky, which I know is, basketball crazy, as a state, just the love for the game of basketball. Why Florida State? What was that about Florida State that appealed to you at that time?
Well, they had 8 girls for every guy on campus at that time. And so that was an appeal. It didn't help me a whole lot, but it was an appeal going into it. Let's see. They had never had a really strong basketball program, and so I felt like I could play. And I was one of those kids that if I was playing, that's what made me the most happy. I was not a good bench guy. I had to be playing. And so I knew I had a better chance of not having to live up to some former great player and a big tradition of basketball and all that. So that sort of went with the least resistance. It was away from Kentucky, and so that was good. I wanted to get out and, get out on my own and away from, all the contacts that I had in Kentucky for the most part, because I only had about 10 offers for major schools, and most of them were like Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Louisville, Murray, Dayton, Cincinnati, those kind of places. So I was not one of those well-regarded, high, recruit type of players coming out of high school. So I thought it fit me real well to go down there.
Was there any sort of culture shock at Florida State for you coming from from where you came from in Kentucky? A lot of people talk about their college years being kind of an enlightening time where they kind of get a whole new perspective. Was it like that for you, just culturally at Florida State?
Culturally, socially, educationally, financially, looking at things and seeing where you fit, out of your neighborhood, and where there was so much more wealth and prosperity down on the campus, and you see people riding around in cars, and you got a bunch of 17 to 22-year-old people on campus, and you look how they dress and how they walk, how they talk, where they're from. So that was a big awareness and growing part of my life at the time. After a while, that to be truthful, about 2 months into it, I didn't like it. I wanted to go back home. I didn't like the atmosphere. I thought it was kind of phony, and big man on campus, kind of bull crap going on. I said, I don't need this. So, so I, weathered that storm, and then anyway, just after a while, about 3 months or so, I just sort of got assimilated a little bit into it. But I was lucky because, I had a team, I had a group, and we lived together in a dormitory along with the other students and the other athletes on campus. So that was good for me because you always had somebody that was going through kind of the same thing, the adjustment.
I was just curious. I was at such a different time in the game. We're talking about at that time before, the NBA really became what it did in the late 70s, early 80s. Like you said, Florida State wasn't necessarily a blue blood basketball program, but it certainly, served as a catapult for you to the NBA. When did you, during your Florida State career, kind of get an understanding of where you fit in the basketball world in terms of you would have a chance to play at the NBA level and be one of those top picks in the draft and have an opportunity to have a professional career? At what stage of your time at Florida State did that become clear to you?
Not really until my senior year. I hadn't really thought about it too much. As you mentioned, it was being in school was important and catapulted me. When you talk to Hugh Durham, he'll say that having me down there sort of was catapulted the basketball program at Florida State, to where, we had a lot of success. Hugh was the new coach. The head coach died the summer between my senior year and when I went to, started school there. So Hugh Durham was the assistant coach and he became the head coach. And we had played freshman ball at that time. Hugh had really tried to recruit out of the Florida, southern Georgia area. He was trying to get guys from New Jersey and up in Ohio and Kentucky, where he was from. He was from Louisville, and played basketball and football and baseball. Was a heck of an athlete and was a real competitor in many sports throughout his whole life, including, being a top-ranked badminton player and a handball player when that all started. He was a very competitive guy. And so, to get with somebody like that, that really was starting his own career. He was a Florida State grad as well, 1,000-point scorer down there. So to get in there, he was trying to build a culture, and he knew it, had to get out of running the shuffle offense, and had to open it up and, get some good athletes. So in '66, he saw something in me that a lot of other coaches didn't, and wanted me to come down there. And it turned out pretty good. I took it seriously. I trained hard. I did a lot of extra stuff on my own, and we grew together into a point where we had a top. I think we were ranked 11th my senior year, at 23-3 record. The bad thing was we were on probation, but at least we set the stage for him to tell other players that he's recruiting about, Florida State's a serious contender. And as a matter of fact, 2 years after that year, they went to the finals and lost to UCLA against the Walton team. And that's something that I was thinking about. That you had the finals of the NCAA tournament, and the UCLA team gets to play on its home court.
Well, they were winning so
much. Plus, back then they got a bye. So they got a bye. So the Wooden teams, if you put it in perspective, just look at it. The Wooden teams, if you won the championship the year before, the next year you got a bye in the first round. So you only had to win 3 games. You could be a champion in the tournament. And they didn't have tournaments then, different like ACC or SEC conference tournaments. But I thought that was interesting thing to be able to play the finals on your home court.
It'd be a pretty nice benefit if you were UCLA, I guess, having those loaded teams.
I think you would say it helped them. Might have helped them a little bit. What do you think?
No question. So you go from Florida State into the Celtics, organization, which was known for being championship level. What was that like, just in terms of stepping into that professional environment and obviously having enough success that you get your hands on on some Rookie of the Year hardware, but just knowing what the history of that organization was and maybe what the expectation would be for you in your time with the Celtics? Well,
I think you roll the dice and you just go out there and you compete and you find out what everybody's all about. You grow up playing sports and you realize that a lot of people will tell you how good they are, but until you play, you really don't know against somebody. And so you just can't believe the hype, and you got to be serious and humble and figure, well, I put all this work into it. Let's see what everybody's got. I didn't know too much about the NBA. There were very few games on TV. I didn't own a TV all through college, so I didn't watch too many games. I tell people that the third NBA game that I ever saw, I was in it. And so as far as being live, I saw some on TV, obviously, with the Celtics playing on Sundays. And I think Sunday was the only game. They had one game on a week back then. And so it was different. I didn't really know the league, and the league certainly didn't know me. I know that. So to me, there was a whole thing. You talk about championships. You follow in Boston. Bill Russell retired the year before. They had a year in between to where they got the 4th pick in the first round, and that's when they selected me. But before that, they had won 11 championships in 13 years. Now that's they talk about the Last Dance and the Jordan stuff and the Lakers and everybody else, but those guys, Sam Jones and Bill Russell and Casey Jones and Cousy and Heitzen and all those guys, you know what I mean? They can talk about continued excellence. You walk into it and you go, well, it's sort of silly to think that you can match any of that, but you bring your own distinctive style and you try to make your contribution, one possession at a time, and be as consistent as you can. Bring whatever you bring to the game and see what happens.
I wonder, did you, when you look back on it now, I mean, 2-time champion, MVP in 1973, 8-time All-Star, all the things you accomplished in the league from such a place where you weren't sure even until late in your college career that you'd have a professional career to accomplish as much as you did as a player. When did it resonate with you just how much work you'd put in and how much you'd accomplish? Because, if anybody's looking at this resume, it blows your hair back just to see what was done.
I think competition. I'm sorry. I think it's just all about the competition. I love competition, and no matter what it was, it's like anybody else, in any profession, no matter what you do, you have to have a fire in your belly for it, and you got to give it your best, and if you don't, you sort of cheat yourself. So if you find something that really smokes your shorts and do it to the best of your ability, you never know what's going to happen, where it's going to take you. So that was sort of my mantra, and I was a guy that I loved getting up and down the floor. I was lucky. I had that motor in me. I was lucky as a high school player and as a college player that the coaches were into upbeat basketball. I think them having me and my skill set on the team, encouraged them to do that. But, my high school team, we averaged 90 points a game in a 32-minute ball game.
Wow.
So we pressed all the time. We were up and down. In college, we averaged 90 points a game, 92 points a game, so we pressed all the time. And I was on the front of that press, chasing little guys around, trying to channel them into the sidelines and get interceptions and make layups and keep the pressure on. That was so much fun for me because it fit my motor skills. They talked about Dennis Rodman, I would say, and Draymond Green, I had that kind of enthusiasm and exuberance and threw caution to the wind, and that's what I love doing. And when I got into the pros, it was like, oh, it's an upbeat game, and I was ready to get up and down. I was glad that I played in those systems because it conditioned me to play in those, in the NBA.
You were obviously in an era when the big man was a dominant force in the game of basketball, maybe much more so than it is right now, obviously, in this pace and space, 3-point shooting NBA. But you would have been considered an undersized center at 6'9", going up against some of the all-time great big men in the history of the league. What was that challenge like physically, having to deal with Lou Alcindor and, who would later be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, those types of big men when you were in the midst of your playing career?
Well, everybody, I didn't go in thinking that I was going to be the best center on the floor every game because I was playing against a lot of veterans, the Bellamy's and the Reeds and Thurmans and Chamberlains and Jabbars and, all those guys. So, you go in and you just try to learn and you try to push them. You want to see how they deal with you because they don't know anything about you, and the 24-second installments, you test everybody out and you don't really know how heavy a guy is and how strong they are until you feel them. You get into a post-up situation and you feel and you see their quickness and how deft they are and how they finish and that sort of a thing. So it becomes a trial and error in terms of just trying to make your contribution and help your team win and to not get embarrassed by somebody. that's the thing that always drove me. I hate being embarrassed, and so you figure I'm gonna, it happened quite a bit. A lot of guys took me to school quite a bit, but I tried to get back on them a little bit.
No, you did. It looked like you did just fine to me. I'm wondering too. You mentioned the Rodmans and the Draymonds. You think about the game and how it's evolved. What is it about the game that you enjoyed post-playing career, then as a coach, and obviously working in a front office capacity? What about the evolution of the game have you appreciated? I would imagine that there are guys who played in your era who like the quicker NBA we see nowadays, the kind of more fast-paced, up and down NBA compared to that kind of rough and tumble 80s era of the NBA.
Yeah, the 80s and 90s, it got a little too physical, I thought. So the league had to do something. And I think by, eliminating some of that hand checking or guiding people around and allowing the offensive players to, strut their stuff and be able to, entertain the people, which is what we're, kind of what we are. It's similar to when football decided they didn't want to be having, tight ends and wide receivers getting knocked down 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, because then they couldn't catch the ball, and score touchdowns. Offense was thwarted. So, but if you look at our stats, the amount of points we average without a 3-point play, we were above 100 all the time. But we were running, we were shooting layups. The only way you got layups back then was if you had fast breaks. So you wanted to get down there and score as quick as possible. They pass the ball more now in their offenses than we ever did. I mean, if the 1 or 2, 3 passes was the most, if the guy was open, he took it, and hopefully it was a shot that they had a decent chance to make. And so, it was a different kind of upbeat game, but it was still upbeat.
Mm-hmm. Just seems
so
like
I like today's game.
But no, it dawned on me. Just what must the game look like through that lens? When you played it in one era, coached it in these other eras. What is who do you enjoy watching that's playing the game today? What are the teams or the styles? Or teams that play a style that you really appreciate or enjoy watching in today's NBA?
Well, say, Q, they all look the same to me anymore. There's no real difference. Everybody does middle pick and roll. Everybody does middle pick and roll to another pick and roll to try to get a mismatch and then an isolation and dance on somebody and try to get into the paint or, shoot a perimeter shot. I would say most penetration results in, if not a layup, a 3-point play, either the first pass out or the second. And so basically everybody's doing the same thing because the analytics tell you to do it. If you hit 3 points is what you want all the time, that's what changed everything, is that the emphasis on the statistics of what the 3-point play brought to the game. And so now, most of these guys, almost all of them are playing now. They never played when there was not a 3-point play. So they don't understand how everybody scored and what we were trying to accomplish within our offensive sets and what we were trying to prevent the other team, from doing, with their offensive sets. You know what I mean? So there was a total different mindset about how you score and the importance of the particular shot that you were trying to get to in your offense. So you think about it, you had a UCLA set, you had the Hawks set, you had some spread offenses, but coaches had their different styles and offenses. Now everybody pretty much does the same. Or if they see something they like, they copy it right away. Yeah, and coaches are still pretty good at they're able to be creative. Doc Rivers, when he was in Boston, he was doing things like guard setting picks for guard in the middle, and then flaring people out and trying to, really swing the ball up top And so, but it all was about the fact that the defense was spread out more. And so then you start strategizing on how to take advantage of that. And so that's why the big man doesn't play as much of a part, because he's not as in the center of the action as much. He becomes kind of just like the power forward or anybody else, that he's going to go up and set a pick and roll or pop. But it used to be most of the plays that you ran, the center had the ball and the center was making a play, out of the post, out of the deep post, the elbow, or the high post. And you were trying to get an open shot by moving off the ball, coming off of picks, and that sort of a thing. So there was very little dribbling. Actually, coaches discouraged dribbling. They thought it was, led to too many turnovers. And if you tried to get into the paint, there was a lot of activity, a lot of arms and legs to get through, because the big guys were there. And Archie Clark always says, man, if I play in today's game, there was a lot of open room for me to, get into the paint, and he said, but back then there wasn't. You had to work around the perimeter, move without the ball, and take, 15, 18-foot jump shots, and you could get wide open. So all that changed when the three-point play became really the premier shot that everybody wants. Right. So when it first came out in the 89, was the 79, 80 season, I thought, the three-point play, I get it. I know you want to keep people in the stands and their interest late in the game, because you could, 3 points, you can get back in the game quicker and keep people in their seats, maybe buy a couple more beers before they go home, or some popcorn or whatever, from a revenue generating standpoint. So I got it. So I said, okay, let's just have the three-point play in the fourth period, so that you got a chance to come back into the game. It becomes a specialty shot. And that was my thought then, and I still feel the same way. I think it still would be a great experiment to watch players play with just the 2-point for 3 quarters, and then be able to open it up with the 3-point play in the fourth period.
Well, I never thought of that. That would change the dynamics for sure. The game, because now
it would give everybody an appreciation of what the game was like for the first 50 years. Right. From 47, let's see, what is that? 57, 67, 77, 30 some years, 35 years. Right.
No, it's different. I remember I'll never forget, I was in high school in Michigan when the first year they adopted the 3-point shot, and my high school team I was a 9th grader, but our varsity team was, tallest player, maybe 6'3", and they just ran like crazy and shot threes and had the best 3-point shooting numbers in the entire state that year. But it definitely was a change, like a sea change, where you could tell the game was going to become something totally different.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the one downside I see of it, because there is so much one-on-one, it becomes, I kind of say, we lost some of the sportsmanship elements to the game. See, sportsmanship got replaced by show-offmanship. And, it's like trying to break ankles and everybody going crazy when a guy gets faked out or dribbled out, or, you're doing, and so I don't like that. I never did like that. It didn't fly when I was a player in any level of trying to embarrass somebody or having fun doing that kind of a thing. And so I thought that some of that behavioral discipline and went away when it got into, well, we're gonna go one-on-one, and that kind of a thing. And then it got to where guys were standing over people and talking so much trash and all that. And I thought, to me, that's not really a good thing to show the young players how to act with the game. And then when they're playing and competing, it's almost like they had disrespect for their opponents instead of having respect for them. A little bit of that crept into the game, and it got more and more and more. But it seemed like the fans kind of liked it. It was something they could focus on, and it became, the game became a little more controversial. So, and then when more people started talking about it, it's one of those things. Now you listen to the talk shows and all that stuff, and it's always about somebody's attitude or somebody's, did this and somebody said this about somebody else. And I'm going, what is this, like Entertainment Tonight or what's going on? And I thought this was sports. It's not, reality TV, and everybody's, you know what I mean? That's what, and I don't like that about sports. It's sort of growing up being old school. I think I like the more disciplined, humble approach, and that you respected people. Like, when I played, if you dunked on somebody, and there wasn't a lot of dunking, because you didn't have to. And then if you dunked on somebody and made a big deal of it, you're probably going to get knocked on your ass one or two times, one or two plays down the road. Somebody was going to sucker you. Somebody was going to get you up the back of your neck, and that's just the way it was, because you didn't want to show anybody up.
Right.
There was that respect. And I think that's gone away a bit.
Yeah, it's a different era, this social media era, even for me, watching it, just growing up watching the NBA in a different era. It's a completely different iteration of the game right now. You looking at your coaching career was fascinating to me, to have coached in the NBA, the CBA, the WNBA. I mean, you got a chance to touch the game in so many different ways. And I'm curious, what was it about coaching that presented a challenge that you liked in all of these different phases? I mean, certainly the coaching the Chicago Sky in 2005 and 6 that had to be really interesting, at the advent of what the WNBA has become, of course. But early in its existence, to be a coach in that league, I'm curious, just what was that like? What was the different maybe factors that went into coaching in the WNBA compared to the CBA or the NBA and other places you've been?
Well, you didn't have purses and makeup and stuff like that all around in your training room or on the scores table during practice, and so it was definitely different. Let's just say that. Mm-hmm. And I think there's there's a different mentality, I think, with some of the lady players, that, there wasn't this big yearning or desire to be the dominant player. It was a lot more of the kind of, I'll just be part of the team and do my part, and don't worry about how many minutes I play, and I don't have to average a lot of points and run offenses through me. It was a different mindset with a lot of, of the players, and not with the really good ones. The really good players, they wanted to dominate. They had that feeling, but I just thought there was more of that laissez-faire kind of attitude in the women's game. Mm-hmm. And so that was different. The CBA was just, low budget, terrible travel. The talent, all you wanted to do as a coach was to try to get a guy a chance to get into the NBA and make a few bucks. Mm-hmm. That was my outlook on the CBA experience. So I tried them out. I just wanted to see what it was like. I was an athletic director at a small women's college, so I got to see college sports a little bit from that avenue, from that viewpoint. But the pro coaching, I enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed starting out. Well, actually, I was the last player coach to coach for, in the NBA when I did it with the Celtics the year before Bird came with the team. Mm-hmm. And that was a big mistake. After that season, I told him I wasn't going to coach anymore and just was going to be a player. And so we drafted Bird. I go, well, if I'd have stayed coach, I'd have been a coach of the year. I got a 29-win season. I could have had a 60-win season if I'd have stayed coaching. But anyway, but it was good, and it was challenging. I mean, I looked at our stats, say, cool, we won over 50 games twice when I was with Charlotte, and a margin of victory was 1, 2, or 3 points.
Wow.
Win over 50 games. So, there's the you can't afford to make a lot of mistakes as a coach when your margin of victory over 82 games is, a one basket or basket and a half.
Right.
And so that's really the your real job is to be as efficient as you possibly can, and keep the team and get an attitude around the team that, we're like a grove of trees. Maybe not every tree looks great on its own, but all together it can be, very beautiful and structurally and that type of a thing. And, that's, you got to try to have the right kind of people, on your team that buy into that, and that's one of the, the real challenges of coaching in the NBA, besides for the fact that you're playing against really good players and really good coaches every night.
Right. I know
and they say that, these guys, they're not playing hard and all that stuff. I know one thing: if you don't play hard in a game, you're going to lose in the NBA. If you think you can just mail it in, it just doesn't happen. So,
too competitive a level, at the NBA level. I certainly haven't covered it for the last 20 years for me. I laugh at the idea that they don't play defense or don't play hard in the NBA when I hear people say that. And I'm like, you have no idea. You have no idea how much more physical and technically sound a game it is at the NBA level compared to all other levels of basketball. I know when you coached in Charlotte, those little good teams, and people that remember this, that Kobe Bryant was drafted and then traded to the Lakers. Do you feel like in hindsight somebody played you? They didn't tell you how good Kobe was going to be?
Well, I don't think anybody knew. I mean, he 13 teams passed on him.
Right.
All right. So, and we had a real need for a big, and I had just taken that job in the summer. So, I remember I traded Kobe Bryant, and I had never seen him play on tape or anything. I had never seen, I don't know anything about Kobe Bryant when we made that trade. It was done with the general manager, Bob Bass, and Jerry West, and, and the agent, and Kobe's agent, and Kobe himself. Right. He says that we drafted him and traded him. No, he told us that he was not going to play in Charlotte if we drafted him, that he wanted to go to a big market. So we said, okay, we got a high school kid. We don't know a lot about him. He's a high school kid. And, he's not a big, and we need a big. And, yeah, he's going to be good. He's not going to, and it still took him a couple or 3 years before he became Kobe Bryant because, he grew into his adult body while he was getting paid. So, it wasn't that big of a stretch to make that trade. But I have to tell you, I did trade one of the greatest all-time players and never had saw him play on tape or anything. That was my first big move. Not that I made the move. I just went along with it. I knew we needed a big, and I was always all about getting Blotty because Blotty will give you 13, 8, and 5 assists a game pretty consistently, and then be even better in the playoffs. So that's what we needed when we were building the team. We had Glenn Rice and Del Curry, Muggsy Bogues. We had Mason, so we had our bigs were rounded out. We had some pretty good perimeter shooters and a good ball handler. So, Kobe wasn't the main, talent skill set that we were looking for at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's just interesting. You think about the evolution of the game and how different the focus has been over the past, couple of decades. And you mentioned some of those players that you had on those Hornets teams. I feel like, and I don't know if this is just the fan in me that feels this way, but I always feel like there are great players that have come through the league in different areas who get overlooked historically. We kind of forget about how good some of these other players were, how the quality, watching The Last Dance, as you mentioned earlier, I've been amused at people kind of glossing over the competition. Well, those teams Jordan played weren't very good if you look at today's game. And I'm going, man, whatever era you're in, you're talking about the best of the very best out on those courts. They're great players in every era. It just looks different. But it doesn't take away, to me, from the fact that these at the time were the best players on the planet competing in the NBA.
Well, I mean, you're right. Obviously, but the collective talent in the league, as opposed to particular teams. But the league is the same way now as it has always been. You got the top three, the top third, the bottom third, and the middle third, and it seems like it always breaks that way. And a lot of the teams in the top third stay there because they're able to, keep that thing going, like the Celtics did for so long, and like the Bulls did, and like the Lakers did, and Detroit and Chicago and all those teams, and Miami and San Antonio, but you can't say, I mean, I just named those teams, but there's not many other franchises, of the 30 that are out there that have been able to be that consistent.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's something special about keeping the train rolling. When you got that talent and keeping that talent and keeping it hungry and together and focused on winning.
In your time in the league, and like I said, I appreciate you taking some time. I know we've kept you for a while, but I'm just curious. In your time in the league, as both a player and coach, what was the one kind of correlation, in terms of traits that led to success? Was it that marriage of having a really sound organization structurally and finding ways to put talent into place? Or was it just that never-ending search for the right mix of players and talent to come together to be successful? Because we watched the Bulls come out of nowhere. I mean, they had to build up once they got Jordan and build themselves into that dynasty franchise. The Lakers and Celtics already had that. But the Pistons had to learn how to become that kind of organization. The Warriors in recent years, obviously, have had to learn how to put all those things in place to be good for an extended period of time. Is there something that you can look at and say this is the magic mix of components you need to be successful?
I think you got to marry the front office desire, and the head coach, and what that the principles and that they bring, and then you got to get a really good player to buy into that. Number one, you've got to have those three things, and you build on that. Right. If you look at all of the great franchises and being consistent, they had those three qualities about themselves, and they stayed with it. They didn't try to get too smart or too clever about things. They took chances, obviously, but they really did their work. I used to say, guys like Red Auerbach, he was one of these guys that playing from strength, because when he got Russell, he knew he had somebody like nobody else has ever seen play the game, with that athleticism and that length. And so all of a sudden, when they start winning, Red became the guy where he was just sort of, I always think about him hovering above the entire league and just picking and choosing the type of guys he wanted to have with Bill Russell, and figuring out ways to get those guys, not based solely on talent, but also on character, and intelligence, and that type of a thing. So he kept that going a long time, better than probably anybody else ever has.
Just interesting. I always wondered that if there's some kind of defining trait, and I know that everybody has studied it. It's not like we're talking about something that hasn't been examined a million times over, but it's just interesting that there's formula that travels from generation to generation like that.
if you ever listen to Bill Russell talk about his experience with the Celtics and his friendship with Red Auerbach, who was the guy who was paying him, the guy who was coaching him, he describes it as heaven on earth, best thing that ever happened to him, and he lives it to the day. If a guy, like when John Havlicek died last May, Bill Russell traveled from Seattle, Washington area all the way to be at that service, and he's always there. He's doing it because that was, the best part of his life. He knew he had something special. So when you get a coach, a guy, your best player, a great player like that, have that kind of relationship with the coach, that his influence over everybody else on the team is huge, in terms of moving forward and doing what it takes to win and be successful, and really enjoying it while you're doing it. And that's what you have to have. When Riley was out there, he had the Jabbar, and then Magic. But
Right.
Jabbar was the solid guy. He was the guy that you need a basket. Magic wasn't shooting. Jabbar was shooting because he had proven, that he was the guy. He was one of the best finishers in the game. But you had those guys that were the cement. And if you look at Popovich, he had David Robinson, and then he got Tim Duncan. He got two guys of the same ilk.
Yeah.
And you just look at every team when Riley was down in Miami, who did he have in the beginning? Basically, he had, when he got Alonzo Mourning, he had really something to build on. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And with Detroit, I guess it was probably Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah.
Joe Dumars. Maybe Joe Dumars was the guy. I always thought Joe was the real leader of that team, just in the way he performed, and you could tell the respect that everybody had for him. And so you always need those types of people on the team to begin creating any kind of a long-lasting success or a dynasty.
It's just interesting. Very, very interesting way to look at things. Listen, I appreciate it. I hope the weather is good up there to you in Maine. And you and the family stay safe and sound during what is an unprecedented time, obviously, for everybody else. We don't have live basketball to digest right now, but it's a time to go back and look at maybe the history of the game a little bit. And always fun to do it. Dave Cowens joining us here on the Hang Time Podcast. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you much.
You too. Take care of yourselves.
All right, we'll do that. Thanks, Dave. Many thanks to the Hall of Famer, Dave Cowens, Boston Celtics great, join us on the Hang Time Podcast. I get schooled when I talk to some of the guys who played in this league in a different era. I always like listening to the wisdom they share. Dave Cowens, fantastic conversation and a fantastic guy, one of the league's greats. We appreciate him and everybody else joining us here on the Hang Time Podcast throughout this shutdown. We'll be here. We're not going anywhere. As I keep mentioning, we're going to keep finding people to talk to and delivering some compelling conversations about the game of basketball and everything else that's going on. So for my producer, Anthony Bonaparte, and everybody here at the Hang Time Podcast, we'll see you next time.
This one is done, but in case you want another one, here's the links to all the fun from Sekou Smith's Hang Time Run. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, NBA.com/hangtime, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, Hoops fans.